Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dave Manning of DM Integration Limited, and I also have with me Casey McDoodle from Horses for Change, who are a sister company of DM Integration, and we are going to share this webinar. So welcome to the session, which we've entitled Firefighting and Kahler's Drivers. Hopefully that will become clear as we go through. Just to say, if you wish to ask any questions during the session, please do so. If you type those in, we will see them and respond. Maybe not immediately, but we certainly will respond. And we'll also leave some time at the end of it for you to ask any questions you have. But thank you for joining us on, at least where we are, what is a beautiful sunny day. So hopefully the same is true for where you are. So without further ado, let's sort of get started. So from a context perspective, when we talk about firefighting and we talk about behaviours, one of the things that we, which is what the Kahler's drivers are all about, one of the things we want to think about is what typically would be the goals and objectives of an organisation. I'm thinking probably a manufacturing organisation here, but it can be applied to any organization. The slide is designed from a manufacturing perspective. But if you look around at the four things around the edge here, so supply chain responsiveness, managing our inventory to optimize that and ensuring we have the appropriate level of capacity, not too much, not too little. Making sure our supply chain is efficient with as least non-value adding activity in it as possible, and recognizing that product life cycles are getting shorter by the day almost, and therefore we need to offer more and more options in that case, in the life cycle of those products becoming shorter and shorter. Somebody said to me a few years ago now, what people want today is more options and more products for less time, driving that shorter product lead time. Now, if you look at those four things around the edge, and if we all went to the pub one night, and think of when I say we all, what I'm meaning there is the functions of our organizations, the various functions in our organizations went to the pub, I think we'd have an incredibly agreeable conversation about those four things. Nobody would say, I don't think, nobody would say that we don't want to do those things. So nobody would say we want our supply chain to be less responsive. In other words, lead times getting longer. In my observation, customers want shorter and shorter lead times. Nobody would say we want tons and tons of inventory that's sat around doing nothing or spare capacity that isn't being used. I think we'd all agree that my comment about product life cycle is true. I don't think anybody would say let's introduce as much non-value adding activity as possible into our supply chain. I think we'd be the opposite of those things. We'd all have an incredibly agreeable conversation that these are sensible goals and objectives for any organization, frankly. I accept this slide is written from a manufacturing perspective. However, when we came back into work the following morning, same people, same functions, I think all things would be slightly different. So if I'm being very sort of stereotypical, how much inventory, so take the inventory example, how much inventory does the average sales director want to have? And in my observation, the answer to that question is loads. And he wants loads, he or she wants loads, so that they can always say to the customer, yes, you can have that, we've got it. If you ask the same question to the average finance director, how much inventory do we want? I think they would be saying none. And if you ask that same question to the supply chain director, the answer would be just enough, optimal. Now, if you think about those three answers, and I know they're stereotypical, but if you think about those three answers, they are creating conflict in the organization. And yet last night in the pub, everybody was agreed that we want the right amount. If you take, for instance, short cycle, product life cycle and options, how many colors, options does the average sales and marketing director want to offer? The answer is as many as possible, loads. You ask the same question to the manufacturing director, how many options do you want? How many colors do you offer? Their answer would be, you can have any color you like as long as it's black. In other words, one. Now, again, last night we were completely in agreement in this sensible conversation, which I don't think was just fueled by the alcohol. It was a sensible conversation that was not dependent upon what our drivers are, and in particular, what our KPIs are. So if you look at the short cycle example, why does the manufacturing director want only one, as in black? Well, that's because they're measured on manufacturing cost. And what's the cheapest way of doing things? Well, offer one option, black. Is the average sales and marketing director measured on manufacturing cost? Well, clearly not. What are they measured on? Well, they'll be measured on things like market share. And what's the best way of gaining more market share? Well, basically offer any option, any combination that any customer ever wants. That means lots of options. What is driving the behavior on the following day is not all of a sudden that we've grown horns and hate each other and want to clash. It's last night we were having a conversation based upon sensibility. This morning we're having a conversation based upon our KPIs, which are creating conflict in the organization. And before anybody thinks it, there is no such thing as constructive conflict. It's called conflict. And so we need to be thinking about what those drivers are. And I've used the example on the slide, drivers being KPIs. Casey, when she picks up with the drivers section of this webinar, we'll talk about more things than that. So if that's the organization we're in, very typically what we see in those types of organizations are a combination of these things. The challenge of what is so-called firefighting drives a very silo mentality. We have multiple sets of numbers, often on multiple spreadsheets. So we're not singing from the same hymn sheet, quite the opposite actually. The ERP system is blamed for not working, or is the real answer that we don't work it? We fill it with bad data. We don't follow procedures. Our process discipline is poor. Is that the real answer? But of course, the blame goes to the ERP system doesn't work. We've got multiple ways of doing the same thing. One business manager forecasts in one way using assumptions, one uses history. So I'm not saying there is a right way, but let's define the way we want to do something and all do it that way until we all find a better way of doing it. That leads to a lack of clear responsibilities, etc. A confusion over real objectives, which was the previous slide. That leads us to a defensive behavior and a blame culture. What's the best place to find out what's going on in the organization? Well, that's clearly the corridor or the smoking shelter, the rumor thing. Ad hoc communication, short-term focus. Because my backside's on fire, if I don't put the fire out on my backside, then there won't be a tomorrow. It leads to individuality rather than team, or perhaps I should say function rather than company. And then we've got the heroes or favorites, the people who run around the organization with capes on, fixing things. They're rewarded. They may be rewarded financially, but more likely they're rewarded from a hero mentality. Fred's a great job, he always gets the job done. The problem with heroes is by putting the fire out, very often they will light another one, which will smolder over the evening, which will create a raging fire tomorrow. That's great, I can be a hero tomorrow again. Now, if you notice, and I hope when I put this slide up in the education we do, most people, or not most, many people will look at it and go, have you been to our company? I'm not saying that any organization has all of those characteristics that's on that slide. If the hat fits, of course, wear it. But I suspect that there won't be any one of you that doesn't recognize at least some of them. And it's that is causing the lack of performance in many ways. So firefighting does get the job done, but at what cost? Please note also on that slide that there is at least half of those things are not process issues, they're behavior issues. Hence the section that's going to come in a few moments around the drivers. So think of this as a behavioral challenge as compared to a process challenge. It is, of course, both, but behavior is a key factor. Now, if we look at the model that we in DMI and Horses for Change have for at least manufacturing and supply chain excellence, it's this one here. So we've got a vision or a mission. We've got some strategic business objectives. What we're going to do is we're going to execute those objectives, and the leadership execution piece will be through a process that we refer to as integrated business planning, that I'm sure many of you are indeed familiar with. But leadership execution connects the day-to-day, month-to-month activity below to the strategic objectives and the vision above. And it's IBP, which is not a supply chain process. IBP is a leadership strategic execution process. If we don't have an execution process, please don't be surprised when it's not executed. What we have below are not all of the processes, but we've grouped them into portfolio or product management, customer demand management, supply chain management. Of course, there are others, financial management, HR, etc. We're not ignoring those, but what we're saying is there is a detailed set of processes below those columns. Underpinning those columns is we're never good enough. Continuous improvement is here forever. Continuous improvement means change. Change means change in terms of the way we behave. You know, not many people, in our experience, like change. If continuous improvement and change is going to continue to happen in the future, and my argument would be the pace of change today is faster than it's ever been, but as slow as it's ever going to get. If that is a true statement, which I solidly believe it is, then we better get used to change. In fact, we better get more than used to it. We better get to love change, to seek it out, to try to find it, to get more of it. How many people have you met in your life that truly love change? Clearly there are some, but the majority, the answer to that question is not. And what Casey will pick up on is some of that behavioral stuff that's driving that. So we do need to have a people development process underpinning it, and embraced in that is this thing, change management, I've just mentioned. Underpinning the whole thing, again, behaviorally based, is a balanced scorecard. So as we don't create those conflicts by pitting one function against another function, one team against another function, and critical success factors which are linking the day-to-day and the month-to-month to the long-term vision and strategy. Now, if I measure you irrationally, how will you behave? Now, most people will answer that by saying, if you measure me irrationally, I will behave irrationally. And indeed, I agree with that. But somebody once said to me, if you measure me irrationally, behaving irrationally is extremely rational. Too many rationals in that statement, but there you go. And I think that's very true. The first question we need to ask ourselves about KPIs is not what KPI should we have, but what behavior do we want? And if you can answer what behavior do you want, then you can figure out what KPI will get you that behavior. If you ask that question in the reverse, as in KPI first, you'll get the behavior you deserve. Is that the one you want? So again, KPI is very linked to the behavior element of that firefighting picture before. And underpinning the whole thing is data quality. You know, how good is the data? General statement, how good is the data in most organizations? And I suspect that answer, based upon my experience, is not good enough. And yet, if you build a house on sand, well, we know what happens. And the data quality piece is deliberately at the bottom of that chart because it underpins everything. Now, is data wrong because the computer system makes it wrong? I don't think so, very rarely anyway. Occasionally that is true, but that's not really the answer. Is the data poor because the process makes it poor? I mean the process, not the understanding or the discipline of that process. I suspect not. I suspect if I read any of your process definitions, It would not say, please maintain this data really badly. I think it would be quite the opposite. So what is it that drives data to be in a position that is less accurate, less good, less quality than we would like? Well, the answer to that question is it walks around on two legs. Data quality is a people issue. It is a behavioral issue. It might be understanding or training within the process. It might be acceptance of the process. It might be understanding the why associated to the process. It might be that we don't care about it. Now, care, that's a very emotive term, but we don't care about data quality. Why do we not care? Because it's not made explicitly responsible to us and measured through a set of KPIs. Therefore, it's less important. So how many MDs would have the profit statement on their desk every day, or every month, shall we say, sorry? I think the answer to that question is everyone. How many MDs would have the stock record accuracy measure on their desk every month? I think the answer to that question would be very few. That in itself sends a message. One thing is important, one thing is not important. Of course, in the pub last night, we'd have all agreed it was important. But this morning, it's not in our measures, it's not in our radar, it's not in our behavior, and that underpins the whole thing. So I'm going to now hand over to Casey, who's going to take the next section of the webinar.
Okay, hi everyone. So just following on from what David said there, especially picking up the change aspect initially, I think with change, when we focus in on ourselves now as people, both leaders of ourselves, our day-to-day life, but also leaders in our workplace, or even just being a team member, even if you're not particularly in a lead position, it's how do we deal with change? And what does change make us feel and think? With change can come the positive, the excitement, the inspiration, the open to being creative, what the potential for the future. But then with change can also come vulnerability, fear of the unknown, fear of no direction, and what the future could potentially hold, and that not knowing. So it's how we as people can look at ourselves and take note of how those emotions drive our thinking and also therefore have a knock-on effect and drive our behavior. So when I talk about drivers, I'm not talking about obviously car drivers or anything like that. I'm talking about drivers that are instilled within us from a very young age and are then influenced from our experiences, our beliefs, our values. All of those have an effect on our drivers and what we think and feel, and therefore how we behave and interact with others. And Kahler was one of the first people to categorize the 5 different ways of being, which I'll go into in a moment. But the reason why I think that this is quite a good thing to talk about and become more aware of from a driver's perspective is how we can use it as a tool for our metaphorical toolbox. Again, both in our day-to-day lives, but also in the workplace. Because ultimately, if we don't know what makes us tick and truly understand ourselves and what our triggers are, why we act and say the things that we do, then how can we learn to understand others for the better ultimately? Because if you understand somebody else and you understand what triggers them and why they're saying the things that they're saying, then surely you can work with that. So therefore it's either more productive, more efficient, you work better together, you have a better team dynamic, whatever the situation may be. So this is why it's really important to become aware of your drivers. And it's not the be end and end all of a human behavior. It's just one element that even if you took one step to learn a bit more about your drivers, then you're in the right direction really for understanding anything from emotional intelligence to body language to generally understanding people as people. So there's good sides and bad sides to our drivers that can be a positive and negative depending on the scenario that we're in. Again, that's very much whether you're at home or in the workplace. So becoming conscious of that is core to this, and giving yourself a choice to ultimately respond and not react. Those are 2 very different things. And when we talk about our conscious and subconscious, it's usually our subconscious that wants to sort of have that impulsive reaction and our rational, that's what we want to do, but we don't always allow ourselves to do that because our rational mind talks us out of doing certain things, and we go with our logic in that moment in time. So what we would tend to do to find out what your drivers are, there's a questionnaire that can be done, and it consists of 25 short questions, and ultimately you're meant to answer the questions from what your gut feeling is saying, because that's you truly tuning in to your gut feeling, your subconscious of what you truly feel and think about that question and what you want to answer, what your answer to be for it. And from that, it then itemizes your general characteristics. And this is something that we actually go further and deeper into when we do our H4C, Horses for Change, development, leadership and team building workshops. It is a questionnaire that we can send to anybody if anybody wants it at the end. So please do give us a shout if that's something that you would like. But it's not, it's what I wanted to highlight, it's not a personality test. It's not something that's going to categorize you and put you in a box and put a label on you, not at all. It is very much something from a self-development point of view, where it is just opening your eyes to looking at yourself and being a bit more self-reflective, and looking at how ultimately you do have a choice of how you behave, and therefore have an effect on the people around you. So self-development is the key here, and that is a core thing that should be in anybody's mind, especially in a leader position and of ourselves, for the better. So as a leader, you should seek to know your employees, or know your team around you, or know your friends around you, know the people around you that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, because knowing more gives you information, and with that information, that allows you to do something with that information. It's great going into the unknown with no information, and again that brings back all those feelings of fear, vulnerability, all that sort of thing. Well, why not gather more information where you can? Learn to know people around you, almost as if it's a topic in itself. So by doing that, we're understanding the why, we're recognizing our behavior in that moment, and we're making the conscious choice to change it. Our patterns of behavior are things that are, again, how does a habit form? Well, if you were to do something, the same thing every day for 30 days, that is you starting to create a new habit. And that ultimately, if you become aware and you consciously do that, that is you becoming more mindful, therefore more self-aware. And from a mindful point of view, again, unfortunately, that word has got some negative stigma to it, because people think it's about doing lots of sort of therapy and that sort of thing, but it's not. Solely being mindful is merely being aware of what you're doing in that very moment in time. Again, whether it's in the workplace or wherever, in the car, wherever. So you're not future pacing and you're not living in the past. And this is why it's great when we work with the horses, because the horses very much only live in the moment. They don't have the ability to future pace or live in the past. So they bring us as humans into the moment, hold the mirror up to our face ultimately, and reflect back what we're truly saying with our body. So are we solely there, or have we got that little idle chatter going on in our head, going through our to-do list that we need to do later, what we didn't get done yesterday, etc., etc. It's that if we stop that idle chatter, we become more in the moment, we give ourselves that space within that moment, and we understand why we're doing it, because we know and we recognize that it's affecting our behavior, how we want to then react versus respond. So we're going to stop ourselves and we're going to make that conscious choice, and we're going to respond appropriately, not react, and therefore regret it afterwards. So these are the 5 key characteristics that Kahler highlighted. So be perfect, be strong, hurry up, please others, and try hard. And usually when we ask people about, if you were to look at those topics without too much content behind them, can you sort of think about where you may be a little bit of that title in a certain scenario? And then people say, actually, do you know, I can see myself in all 5 of those. And that's very true, because we tend to not necessarily come out just as one. A lot of people tend to be 2 or 3 that rate quite high, and then the other ones sort of trickle down below. But some people can be sort of fairly level within ratings over all 5. And again, it depends on, when you're answering the questions, how truthful you're being with yourself. Are you allowing your rational mind to sort of logically think it through and overthink it? Or are you going with your gut and being truthful to yourself and therefore honest with what you would naturally want to say or feel or do in that situation? And the reasons why, again, like I say, we go into this is to look at the pros and the cons of each one. So just not to go into too much depth of each one, but to give you some idea, a lot of people come up as the be perfect, and everybody's perfect is different. What ultimately is perfect to you? And be perfect. So people are always striving to have that little bit of extra time to just tweak that and just do that, just get it right, just cross the T, dot the I. And therefore sometimes in a work environment can miss deadlines because they're constantly checking and checking again and doing a third time check. So this can be a bit of a weakness, and perhaps from a leader point of view, if you are aware of that within that employee, you'd be able to support them appropriately and say, you know, enough's enough, when appropriate, move on. Again, though, a be perfect on the positive side could balance somebody out who's a bit more of a hurry up person. A hurry up person, I'll go into in a minute, who wants to constantly strive for their next job, the next one, a be perfect person who actually says, hold on, wait a minute, we just need to double check this. So it's how ultimately knowing a little bit more about your employees and what makes them tick, you can balance out and delegate where appropriate, or actually work to people's strengths. It's all about working to people's strengths, because with that becomes better productivity, better performance, more efficiency, and a more inspired team. And surely that ultimately is a positive thing when it comes back to like the firefighters that David was talking about. So your be strong person, I think we could probably all think about somebody who is a be strong. Again, in the workplace or at home, this person tends to be fairly aloof, as it says. They're not the best at asking for help, especially when they need it the most. They tend to be the person that everybody goes to ask for the help. And it's how that can ultimately take a strain on somebody in the workplace. How can you support that person when they ultimately need it? And do you know them well enough to know when they need it? So again, going back to a hurry up person, that constantly striving for the next deadline to meet, and they tend to be energized by those deadlines. So that sort of slight bit of pressure is something that motivates them. And I think pressure, again, a bit like what I said about mindfulness, pressure can be perceived as a negative thing. Not always. Pressure can sometimes be a good thing. Pressure can be a motivator. It can inspire people. But for other people, any form of pressure can be very negative. So again, it's looking at your different employees or looking at yourself and knowing what motivates you, what makes you want to get up in the morning and go and do the best you can possibly do in that day or in your work. And if you don't have that, or you can make choices within your behavior to try and gain that, then that's partly your responsibility to do from a self-behavior point of view, but also what could you seek in your workplace to ask for or get better support for. And please others, plenty of people come up as a please others person. This person is very understanding, usually very in tune with their intuition. Something we talk quite a lot about with the horses. Horses are very intuitive animals. From a body language point of view, they predominantly communicate through body language. They don't talk, obviously, like we do as people. We're 90% verbal. Horses are 90% body language. So by instinct and by nature, they pick up on all the tiny subtle cues that are constantly going on with your body. And therefore, that's what they're responding to, because that's you being congruent to what you're authentically saying and feeling. And again, in the day-to-day, human-to-human world, how often do we put a facade on the outside, but inside we feel total opposite, or we're not being truly congruent with what we feel? So what we're saying is different to what we're feeling. And please others people tend to, like I say, are quite intuitive, and they're constantly, their positive feedback is from helping others. So therefore, sometimes they put aside prioritizing their own stuff or their own work, and sometimes that can then lead to them not necessarily hitting deadlines, all that sort of stuff. So it's how you can best support somebody like that in the workplace, or if you feel that you are that sort of character, what can you do to know when that part of your driver is a positive And when it's starting to become a negative, what can you consciously do to change that? And this takes a bit of practice. It's not something that you're going to change overnight, because ultimately our behavior is something that we have subconsciously been doing since we're born. We have been influenced by society, by, like I said before, experiences, relationships, work relationships, everything and anything in our day-to-day interactions with people and general scenarios are influencing our behaviors. So some of those have become patterns, and we do them without even thinking about it. So if you think about the fact that you now want to repattern a behavior that could be negative, then that's something you're going to have to work at, and you're going to have to do it consciously, make conscious choices to do it every day for at least 30 days to get it as a new habit. Bit of hard work. But if you can take one thing from that and become more self-aware and recognize it in yourself, then you're already one step ahead. So you're a try-hard person, very enthusiastic, constantly getting involved in lots of different things, similar to the hurry up. Again, energized by trying something new. Sometimes, if you think about somebody who particularly has this driver predominantly, then they can make small jobs into quite big jobs. And that can clash with somebody who's maybe a slightly different driver. And again, it's knowing that and understanding that, and then being able to be that one step ahead of knowing that that's coming and influencing it for the better if you're in a lead position. So it's looking again at ultimately how in different scenarios core drivers can come to the fore and be the main driver in that scenario, and other times not so much. So like I said, so bring it back to really, okay, well, if I'm starting to become more aware of my drivers and really sort of self-reflective within myself, then I'm starting to become more self-aware. I'm starting to become more emotionally intelligent, because with emotional intelligence comes the awareness, comes the regulation of our emotions in that moment. Are we letting our emotions drive our behavior, or are we just acknowledging the emotion in that moment, knowing and giving ourselves that time to acknowledge it, take a step back, give space to respond appropriately, and picking up on different body language cues from the people that we're interacting with. You know, when you walk into a room, what effect do you have on people? What effect are you having on that person when you're standing face to face with them talking? Do they feel comfortable with you? What is their body telling you? And I'm not saying you got to stand there and scrutinize their every move and, you know, where they're looking or what they're doing, but it's how we're constantly communicating with one another, not just talking, constantly communicating, all our subtle little signs, our breathing, where we're looking, how we're standing, where we're placed, where we're standing, all these things is information. Going back to having that information, because with information you know how to make a conscious decision to do something different. So that's subconscious versus conscious again. And actively listen. I think that's something, especially in day-to-day, we definitely as people don't do enough of. How often are we truly only just listening to what that person's saying? Or have we already formulated an answer and got it ready to go before they've even finished with the question? Anything like that. Active listening is all encompassing of your body, everything, not just with your ears. Listen with your eyes and your whole body. Again, this is something that the horses are really good at doing, because it makes you tune in to your body language and your thoughts and your feelings again. And I think sometimes we don't give enough significance to the fact that our emotions do have such a huge effect on how we behave and respond in situations. And people, I think, sometimes think, you know, oh God, emotions again, that means therapy and talking about airy-fairy stuff. Not at all. All we got to do is just acknowledge it, know that it's there, put it to one side if it's going to serve us, you know, in a negative way in that situation, or allow it to be acknowledged and drive our behavior in a positive way. So looking at the drivers, look at it as a tool to add to your metaphorical toolbox. The productivity, the efficiency of your team or of yourself in different situations and it does get affected by our drivers, because all of that drives our values, drives our beliefs, and drives how authentic we are. and therefore it helps us with our motivation in scenarios, our inspiration, and also when it comes back to all these different qualities that we seek in a, say, a leader. You know, how respectful are we of people? How do we trust that person or our team? All of these things tie right back in to the different 8 qualities of what we seek in a leader, but also our drivers and our values and beliefs. So don't just be a leader of people, and understand the people around you, understand your employees, understand yourself. And hopefully, although, like I said, we haven't gone through the questionnaire itself today, even just a little bit of fun, you know, a little bit of looking at yourself in a slightly different angle and being open, seeing it as not judgment, seeing it as something food for thought. And, you know, what's the worst that could happen if you just look inward on yourself a little bit and become more self-aware? Surely there's no negative in that. So imagine a workplace where you're so in tune with your colleagues that you're one step ahead of them constantly. So you know what makes them tick. You know what's about to come, even if they don't. So be that one step ahead. You've taken the time out to get to know you, and therefore you've taken the time out to get to know them. And work alongside them to encourage working to the best of their ability. Be a cohesive team, or just be better at interacting with people on a one-to-one basis. That's truly where all this sort of comes from. Is about how you can be a better person, both from a behavioral point of view and knowing how that can influence people around you at home, day to day in the workplace, but also for the better for everybody from a productivity and a performance point of view, and ultimately from a firefighting point of view, as David will continue to elaborate on.
Okay, thanks for that, Casey. So it's myself back. I don't know whether anybody has ever heard of this guy. He was called Peter Wickens, and this is one of his models. I'll explain in one sec. Peter Wickens was a very interesting character. He was the personnel, HR, and IT director at Nissan in the northeast of the UK here, when they set up back in the 80s. Now, if you think back then, that combination, people and IT, very unusual in those days, and yet so appropriate. Peter wrote a load of books and developed a number of models. This is one which I particularly like. I particularly like this from a project improvement perspective. So if people are doing some form of transformation project, or if people are implementing major new systems, etc. I particularly like it. He actually used a series of A words to describe these things. I couldn't understand some of them, so I put my words on them, but nevertheless, the essence of what he was saying is what I'm about to describe. So the vertical axis is the process centricity of the organization. So if we are highly process driven, if we've got lots of discipline around that process, if we do all of our work through clear process, then you'd be high on the vertical axis. If, on the other hand, you were an organization which was very people-centric, you take people with you, you do a lot of the things that Casey's just described, then you would be high or farther to the right on the horizontal axis. And what he was saying is, if we are low on process but high on people centricity, then you will be on that right-hand box, the one that's called chaotic. I could have easily written firefighting there. People are running around, doing their best, trying really hard, getting the job done, but it's very chaotic and, as we described earlier, very firefighting. If people are in the left-hand bottom box there, where it's low process and low people, then you get a lot of apathy. So Peter Wickens described this as the apathetic organization, full of 9-to-5ers, rubbish job but pays the mortgage, can't wait to go home, not my fault, little accountability, I'm doing my best, very apathetic. If you're in the high process but low people become alienated. They're alienated because they think that look what they've done to us now. They don't want us to do the job. We've got to fill in this form. We've got to do this transaction. Oh my goodness, we become very alienated. Now, clearly the place we want to be from a people and from a performance perspective is the top right hand. So engaged and focused and high performing, really is the top box. That's where we like to be. Now, on the basis that I believe a large percentage of organizations I've ever met in my 30 years start off in that chaotic box. So I think the slide at the beginning, which I hope you resonated with, in fact, many ways I hope you don't resonate with, but I hope you resonate with, is a firefighting organization. That's the vast majority of people I meet. And at some point, somebody will say, we need to get out of this. We need to get engaged and focused and high performing. We want to go from bottom right to top right. And so they all form some form of initiative to do that, a transformation project, a major IT project, the implementation of integrated business planning, something to try and get us to the top. Now, the problem with that, and let's say it was a combination of those things, a transformation project which embraced the implementation of some new systems. The problem with that is by putting those processes in place and addressing the data, etc., the idea is to go from bottom right to top right. However, if you do not take people with you on that journey in the way Casey has described, etc., if you do not take people with you, you don't go from bottom right to top right. What you actually do is go from bottom right to top left. And that's where we have a bunch of angry young people. People don't generally spend their lives angry young people. What they do is they give up and they become apathetic. And so the intention of this transformation project was to take us to top right. Actually, what it does, after several $1 million and lots of time, it takes us to top left, which then slips back to bottom left. In other words, we spent a whole bunch of time and money ending up exactly where we were before. Hence, the relationship between the people stuff that Casey has just talked about and the more process orientation that typically DM integration in its efforts with things like IBP, supply chain management, etc., would be trying to do. Those two things need to come together. Lots of organizations forget the people piece and turn many transformation projects, despite their best intentions, into IT projects. And I guarantee to you, when that happens, they will end up alienated and then apathetic, and they get back to where they started. So what is the objectives of this thing that we call business excellence? Well, it is to execute that vision and strategy through one set of numbers. In other words, an integrated set of plans that are realistic. Do not misread that word realistic. That doesn't mean soft or weak or pathetic. It means realistic. To have visibility and transparency of the medium term. Take an example of capacity. There is no such thing as a capacity shortage. Little pregnant pause there for effect, given time and money. Most times companies have a capacity problem, it is in the short term, and then they don't have the time to do anything about it. So consequently, we're back into my backside's on fire, I've got to do something about it. If I have the visibility and the transparency, I will have the time to fix it. I may not have the money, but that becomes then a choice. I mean, this is what was the problem with the Titanic sinking? I know that you could spend several hours talking about that. There's several programs been made about that. But one of the problems was not that they didn't see the iceberg. They did see the iceberg. I remember watching the film. The problem was they saw it too late. If they'd have seen that iceberg further out through visibility and transparency, they could have done something about it, but they didn't. And that's very common with many issues within organizations that we see and work with. Clear roles, responsibilities, efficient, integrated, robust processes. Again, that's a people issue. Teamwork and cross-functional alignment. Teamwork, people issue, KPI issue. More planning, less execution, less firefighting. Do some people, and I bet you can work it out from Casey's descriptions, some people like firefighting? And the answer to that question is yes. By the way, 35 years ago at Rolls-Royce Cars, which is where I learned a lot of this and worked as the transformation manager, I was the biggest hero and biggest firefighter the world has ever known. And I loved it. Now, I needed to learn that that is not the best way of leading an organization. Consistent performance measures, I talked about that earlier. Decisions made in a timely fashion, that's related to the transparency issue. Top down and bottom up, but what that's all about is ensuring that the strategy and vision is truly executed. And in particular through IBP, the focus of IBP is not a supply chain process, it is to identify differences, so-called gaps between the top-down view and the bottom-up view. Those gaps could be gaps in revenue, they could be gaps in profit, they could be gaps in resources, they could be gaps in capacity, it's just gaps. And by the way, gap is not always negative. What we're trying to do through IBP is create a positive gap, which is called growth. Then we go back to some people stuff. I ask a question many a time in the organization, is it safe to tell the truth here? I've asked that question to many an executive, in fact, hundreds of executives, and they've always given me the same answer. Yes, it's absolutely safe. My door's always open. There's a no blame culture. And then somebody sitting to my left has said, yeah, the last person that told the truth here doesn't work here anymore. Now, that may not be fire and fire as it sounded that way. It might be they're not seen in a good light. They're seen as negative. They don't get promoted. They're talked about in a way that makes them feel frustrated. So is it safe? Something to think about. Is it safe to tell the truth? Then deliver the strategy, linked to the top bullet there. And what Casey's really describing here is what we describe as a secure-based leadership style. And we've seen many a time, I think many others have seen the differences as laid out here between managers and leaders. I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but we don't actually want, people don't want a boss. What they want is leadership throughout the organization. Leadership throughout the organization is everybody is an expert in their own 3 square yards. And the job of the leader is not to tell people what to do in those 3 square yards, but to get the best out of those 3 square yards. The greatest leader that I have ever had the privilege of working with is a guy called Godfrey Thoma. He was the CEO of several British American tobacco businesses. This particular example comes from Pakistan. And what he said to me, he said, Dave, I don't know anything about the tobacco industry. That wasn't true, he did, he knew a lot. But what he said was, all I do is surround myself with great people and inspire them. My job is inspiring great people to do a great job all around me. In fact, he was the CEO and he applied for a change of title to group, and he wanted to be called the CIO. Now, in most people's minds, that will be the Chief Information Officer. In his eyes, he referred to it as the Chief Inspiration Officer. That's what he wanted to be. That is what leaders. Now, whether that be the leader of the whole organization, the leader of your team, as Casey said, the leader of yourself, the leader of your family, it doesn't matter. The leader of a sports team, it doesn't matter. Those leadership skills are what we're trying to create so that we've got an inspired organization, an inspired team, an inspired family. Think of some of the football teams. Why, when they change managers, do all of a sudden many an organization start to win again? It's the same players. They haven't lost the ability to play football. What they've lost the inspiration. Now there may be some tactics change as well, but that's not really it. It's a people-driven issue. So if you look at the typical organization structure, we've got the boss at the top and we've got a number of heads of functions there. What we want to create here is a team-based, inspired organization. Now, if you think about it, and this is a bit cynical now, what job do each and every one of those people that I've described as directors want next? I know they don't all want to be the CEO, but they all want to get on in life. you will look at many organizations and find the leadership team, which is what that's supposed to show, not as a leadership team, but a bunch of high-level competitors. Commercial are trying to get one over on manufacturing or operations. Operations are not trusting commercial. Finance are just adding up the numbers. In many organizations, what you see there is high-level competitors, not a team. What we're trying to create is a team at all levels. What does that require? It requires clear, aligned objectives and KPIs. None of this competing stuff again that we talked about earlier. It requires mutual commitment to those clear and aligned objectives and to each other. It requires a single direction, not, again, tied back to our critical success factors. It requires consistent measures that drive team-based behavior. You know, I mentioned football. At one time a day, for my sins, I was a professional footballer. I wasn't very good at it, which is why I now do this. But in my day, I played centre forward. In my day, I was on a goal bonus. And so therefore, my measure was, did I score goals? You may say, well, that's fair enough, you're the centre forward. Yes, but in the game, if my colleague up front with me was in a better position to score than I was, would I get him the ball? I don't think so. I'm having that shot because if I can score, I get my bonus. If he scores, we just win the game. It was all about me. It was all about my function, and my function in that example was the centre forward. We want consistent measures that drive the right behaviour, and then we want behaviour and accountability in line with what Casey has described for us. One of the things that I learned actually from Gottfried Thomer was the diagram on the left-hand side is the organization structure that you'll see many times. What that says is we've got a boss. It's very hierarchical. I tell you what to do, you tell them what to do, they tell the workers what to do. Gottfried actually drew his organization chart the other way, which was very in line with his thinking, very in line with I know nothing, I just have to inspire people. And that's where the secure-based leadership terminology sort of came from. Although that terminology it actually comes from rock climbing, where if you watch two people climbing a rock, you've got one person climbing the face and one person with a rope at the bottom. The person at the bottom on the belay will allow the person on the rock to take their own line. They will allow the person on the rock to make mistakes. They will even allow the person on the rock to fall off the rock, but they will not allow them to hit the floor. In other words, the person at the bottom has got their back. And that is the way we see empowerment. We're empowering and inspiring all of our workforce, not from up front, but from behind. And again, that's very, in case you didn't go into this piece, but that's also relevant with horses. You think of the leader of the herd is not always the one up front. The leader of the herd could easily be the one from behind. I've got your back. You carry on grazing. I'll make sure we don't get eaten by any lions. And so we see empowerment in this way. If you want to read more about that, read a book by a guy called David Marquette. The book is Captain David Marquette. The book is called Turn the Ship Around. And he was the captain of the worst performing submarine in the US Navy. And he turned it into the best performing submarine in the US Navy, hence the name of the book, Turn the Ship Around. And he did it through this methodology. Now, I think that's even more remarkable in an armed forces type scenario where it is an extremely hierarchical, orders-driven environment. He turned it the opposite and had huge success. So what we think about people now is so important. This is all the people-centric stuff on Wickens' model. Traditionally, people were, problems were not my job, Jobsworth. Today, we find much more ownership, but what we want in the future is true accountability for fixing those problems or dealing with those issues. Management style, I tell you what to do, supervisor. We're getting towards where there's more facilitation and team leadership. We're talking about that in this webinar. What we want to create is a coaching environment where we, the leader of the company, of the team, of the family, of the function, coach the best out of those 3 square yards. work style tended to be quite individual, even back to the day when we had individual bonuses, productivity incentive types things. We've got more teamwork today, but have we gone far enough? Do we really have empowered teams in the sense of that upside down organization chart? Training and education, yeah, that was non-existent back in the day. Then it became a bit of a luxury. What's the first thing that happens when we get into hard times? What do we stop doing? Well, we stop doing training. Today, it's a necessity, especially for young people who see learning and development as a key part of any job experience. Knowledge, ignorance is the traditional view. I don't understand that. Then I get to understanding, and now we want to be the experts in those areas that we can then be coached in. Attitude to people, liability, cost, asset. I remember traveling and working a lot in America, where you used to see signs outside companies, factories, that said hands required in a very sort of farm hand type phrase. Of course, when you hire a pair of hands, you get a brain for free, but that wasn't what we were looking for. We were seeing them as cost. And then measurement, very personal reward, as I say, back to the productivity incentive days. Then to more team recognition, and then we should be thinking of team reward. And in team reward, I'm thinking of company as the team here. So some challenges, many of which Casey has picked up on. Everything will be okay, it'll be all right in the night. Everything happens at the end of the month, end of the quarter, or the end of the year. End of month crunch and the quarter crunch and the year crunch. Play the game. It isn't safe to tell the truth. We play the game. Tell the truth. Transparency, realism, that's not soft or weak. Excuse me. Commitment and accountability. Trust is a key word in here. I don't think Casey used that word, but everything she was saying was underpinned by creating trust, and in most organizations, lack of trust. From an IBP perspective, roughly right versus precisely wrong. Think of that from a be perfect perspective. How easy is it for people operating IBP who are of the be perfect nature to allow themselves to be roughly right, not precisely wrong? It doesn't come naturally. Therefore, catch it, as Casey described, and choose it or not choose it. Long term versus short term. Lose early is a very old phrase in sales. Defensive from politics, and then true empowerment. So we're looking for this, what we describe as the sweet spot, the place where we integrate people, process, and systems in the middle. And I know I've stolen that phraseology from sport, quite topical, I suppose. If you think of Tiger Woods, the difference between me and Tiger Woods when he played golf was he commented when he didn't hit the sweet spot, and I comment when I do. In other words, he integrates the elements of his game 68 times around. I do it once in every 10 years. That's the difference. That's why he was world class and I was completely useless. And so leadership's role, the key message on that page, because I realize we're at the end of our seminar here, or webinar, is the bottom statement. Leadership is a participant sport, not a spectator sport. And that's leadership from as Casey and myself have said, from a company, from a function, from a team, and from a individual. Leadership of yourself is key. So we would encourage you to think about the drivers, think about being a leader, and think about business improvement. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much for listening. Not sure whether you have any questions. If you have, please fire away. If you think of any later that you wish you'd asked, please fire them across to us. We will always get back to you. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for joining us. If there are any questions, please fire away. But in the meantime, after that, hi Dave. Hi Trevor. Yeah.
There's a question. Yeah, there's a question here from Mikhail, who I know you both know very well.
Yes.
He's asked, if management in your department are managers instead of leaders, how could you best approach this as a lower ranked employee without endangering your opportunities?
I'll let Casey give us an answer to that as well, but in a consulting style, we'll just think about it for a second. And I would say we need to talk to them, understand them first from a perspective that Casey would come at, from a driver's perspective. So understand what makes them tick, and then talk in an honest and open manner. I agree that's a hard thing to do in those circumstances, but that would be our advice. Anything to add to that, Casey?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Definitely, you acting how you would want that other person to act towards you. So that openness, that honesty, that transparency, and setting out the laying the land in that sense to hopefully receive that back. And if that's not then received back, it's how you can change your behavior, whether it's how you ask questions or anything like that, to try and elicit a better response or a better outcome.
Okay, thanks, Mikhail.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Trevor?
No, those are the only ones that I can see.
Well, thanks very much, everybody, for your time as well. Appreciate you listening in.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry we ran over by, well, no, we didn't. We're bang on. So, so thank you very much indeed. Look forward to hearing from some of you. And we're already working with some of you in the first place. So thanks for that, and see you soon. Have a good afternoon.
Bye now.